Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. Together we dive into the world of sci-fi and science fiction. From episodes of Star Trek, Star Wars, to The Walking Dead, Resident Evil, all the hot new science fiction movies from the back doors of Marvel or DC. The Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. You'll never look at science fiction the same way again.
Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Sci-Fi Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Alex. This week we are going to talk about, you guessed it, episode 5 of V-Wars. I've been trying to convince my niece to watch this week, and I might have succeeded. We'll see when she gets back home. I'm very excited about that possibility, and that's one of my favorite things about my nieces and nephews getting older, as I can introduce them to different types of speculative fiction. So when Bree was, about 7 or so, I got her into X-Men Evolution. And now that she is going to be 17 tomorrow, I can introduce her to some more shows like V-Wars, where we can now start talking about the socio-cultural and socio-political implications of the shows, as well as the science and ethics that are in sci-fi and speculative fiction in general. We've been having a lot of those discussions lately, and I have really enjoyed those. Also, happy birthday, Bree! We are going to talk about episode 5 today. So, in V-Wars last episode, episode 4, we saw a bunch of new vampires. We established that the vampires have now collectively decided they want to be referred to as Bloods, and that the girl that Michael had saved earlier, Ava, has helped to start banding them together, and they've decided that they want Michael to lead them since he was patient 0. So, a lot happened in that last episode. They were doing a lot there. We also saw Claire O'Hagan, who was higher up in the DNS, tell Luther that she didn't really trust Niklos, who is technically her boss. But right after she disclosed that to Luther, there was a big explosion at the DNS headquarters, or the facility they were operating out of at least, and Claire was killed. Niklos was injured in it, and we saw Luther kind of pulling him away from harm. A lot happened. We also established that there is a new kind of vampire called a Verdilak. And we talked a little bit in the last episode about these types of Slavic vampires, like Upirs and also Verdilaks, and the origin of them. So now we're going to pick up where we left off. There was a lot that happened in that last episode, though. I felt it warranted a solid recap. In this episode, we start with a vampire pretending to be a human and running away from another group of vampires, and then they simply attack an actual human. So they're getting very smart in how they are approaching this hunt. So it's almost a pack type mentality, but less like wolves from my perspective, and more like the raptors from Jurassic Park. It very much has that clever girl type of component going on. But remember, not much is actually changing with these types of vampires. It's just adding bloodlust and the ability to process blood as a fuel source, more or less. Unless you're a Verdilak, and then you get that heroin type of venom that you are injecting into people with your teeth and getting them addicted to being with you and being fed upon. So there's that, too. But for the most part, it's just triggering that epigenetic change that is making them able to and compelled to feed on human blood. Or at least to feed on blood in general. It's not like on Buffy where they are demons and things like that. Or like in Twilight where they're getting these super special powers. Or even like Vampire Diaries at this point where they have weaknesses to things like vervain. We are just seeing that it's a scientific issue. Right now it's just a genetic change, and they're very much still human in many ways. And by genetic, I want to clarify epigenetic. Remember, the DNA sequence isn't changing, just the gene expression. So with these vampires, it makes sense that they would still be very intelligent because they were humans already, so they're able to process things and hunt like humans, but now they have some of those animal instincts as well. At least from my perspective, that seems to be what's going on. And it's just back to nature versus culture again. So they're getting to draw on both of these things in addition to their enhanced speed and strength and perhaps also agility. I'm not sure how well Michael Fane could go ahead and jump over a railing and use someone's body to cushion his blow before he became a vampire. There's no data on that, so I don't have a control. But I kind of want to say that, maybe he has super knees. All superheroes seem to have really great cartilage in their joints. Super cartilage, if you will. That's how they're able to do those hero and villain poses. I don't know about y'all, but I do have a bum knee, and so immediately every time I see them do something like that, I'm just like, oof, ow, my bones. And, the cartilage that's rubbing away slowly as I age. I think super cartilage is an underrated feature in superheroes, but I digress. In this episode, we also see that the vampire crews are taking over a fortified building, and they are wanting to make it their own facility. We now see General William May, played by Jonathan Higgins, take over the job that Claire Hagen was doing before. And we learn that the explosion was detonated via a cell phone. So this is a type of incendiary device that we've seen in many different action and speculative fiction films over the years. Nikos definitely survived, and he is on board with saying that Michael Fane is the most likely subject to have initiated this attack. He's now the vampire leader, and so he is not just a figurehead, but Michael is doing his best to try to figure out how to be a leader for these people. Heavy is the head that wears the crown, but Michael is trying to do his best to represent these people while also protecting the innocent, like children. Also in this episode, we see that Josh, Danica's ex-boyfriend, is still being used as her juice box. So he is addicted to her venom and is a really steady blood supply for her. Again, Danica has absolutely no qualms with this. It's very messed up what she's doing. It removes the ability of consent on the part of Josh, because he is directly addicted to her. This concept reminded me of something I had read in drug literature about the concept of strawberries. So there's an article that was published in May 2010. It's called Powerlessness and HIV Prevention Among People Who Trade Sex for Drugs, Strawberries. And it's by Elwood et al. So this article is about people who are in the drug culture, as they call it in the article, people who use drugs or around drugs, sell them, etc. And they use a term called strawberries to describe women who trade sex for drugs. Now, I'm not keen on the specific language of this. I get that there's kind of a sterility to it in the academic sense, but it's saying that they are really trading sex for drugs. And that really removes some of the concept of the power imbalance that's really at play here. It's not just trading sex for drugs. These individuals are addicted to drugs. They typically refer to this as specifically being something that happens with women who are using crack cocaine. And I've seen it in other literature as well, in which they've discussed how a lot of times these men will purposefully get women addicted to certain drugs in order to obtain sex from them. And they keep them as essentially drugged up slaves so that they can use their bodies as they please. And since the women are very literally addicted to them, there is not much that they really feel that they can do about it. Because addiction is overpowering. It's something that's very difficult to fight and something that should be taken very seriously. Sometimes in the literature, they will specifically describe strawberries as being African American women, but other times in the literature, it is just women in general. In this article, they found that the results show that trading sexual favors for drugs is not even limited solely to women in general, but that trading sex for drugs is a type of economic behavior that happens between men and women of any race or ethnicity who tend to use crack cocaine. They do also note that there are components that are intersectional in nature for this, and that trading drugs is also strongly correlated to socioeconomic status and homelessness, and that these conditions especially affect people who specifically smoke crack, who are addicted to crack cocaine. So they have a long discussion in this article, and they urge educators and researchers alike to be on the lookout for strawberry-type behaviors. And I like that they are really targeting this towards educators and researchers and not to police officers. The focus in that article is more so on protecting these individuals who have become strawberries, as they refer to them, and to look out for them and try to help them. And that's really what I see when I watch Danica use Josh as her Capri Sun. She has purposefully gotten him addicted to her now that she knows that she has that power. It's just so that she can continue using his body. Now, on the one hand, one may make the argument that at least she is not using other people, so she's not killing anyone, but I don't think that this is necessarily really better when we take an ethics-based approach to it, because it's not like Josh consented in any way prior, and now he is literally addicted to the venom that she secretes when she feeds upon him. It is a form of slavery, and it's something that's just very indicative of who Dani is, who she was beforehand, and who she continues to be. So she was already not that great of a person, and there's the saying that absolute power corrupts absolutely. And that's really what we are seeing with Danica going out here and living her best life to the detriment of everyone else around her. We're going to go on a quick break, and when we come back, we are going to pick up with General May and Michael Fane. Stay tuned.
Want to find out what movies to go see? Then check out the GSMC Movie Podcast. It's your ticket to the latest movies, whether it's a new blockbuster event, romantic, comedy, or action flick. This show has got it all covered. They talk some what to go see now, don't bother, what's hot on Netflix, and everything in between. That's gsmcpodcast.com/movie-podcast. When it's all about the movies, it has to be this new show. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
Before the break, we were discussing Danica using her ex-boyfriend Josh in a very similar manner to that which crack cocaine dealers will use a lot of individuals in the real world, particularly women who are at a socioeconomic status that confers a power imbalance, with the power being held by the person who is giving them drugs, and how their bodies are used by these individuals who are effectively controlling them, just as Danica is doing to Josh. So now we are going to talk about General May, who is taking over from Claire Hagen since Claire has been killed, and what he has to say in his approach. So General May is very anti-vampire. Claire was open to things like Luther trying to bring Michael in alive, and Claire understood that there was a scientific approach here. She wanted to also get this handled, but she understood that sometimes a carrot is perhaps better than a stick. That is not at all the approach that General May is taking. He is strongly anti-Michael and strongly anti-vampire, and he lets that be known very publicly in a speech that he provides to the media. He also states that what Michael has been doing and what the Bloods have been doing is terrorism, and he proposes the use of internment camps, although, of course, he calls them something else, like we always do when we do things like put people of Japanese descent into cages, or putting children of Hispanic ancestry into cages. We always call it something different, but a rose by any other name. It is exactly what it is, and that is an internment camp. And to clarify what that specifically means, internment is the imprisonment of people, usually in large groups, without having any charges filed against them, or specifically an intent to file charges. If you look at the definition for it at dictionary.com, it's specifically a prison camp for the confinement of enemy aliens, prisoners of war, political prisoners, etc. What General May is recommending, nay, absolutely calling for, is very similar to what happened in World War II, and what's also happening right now. So if you're not familiar with what happened in World War II, When war began and America got involved, President Roosevelt signed 3 proclamations that declared that all natives, citizens, denizens, or subjects of Japan, Germany, and Italy who were 14 years or older and are in the United States and not naturalized citizens shall be apprehended, restrained, secured, and removed as alien enemies. Austrian and Korean resident aliens were not declared alien enemies so long as they did not have any German or Japanese nationality declared. So in preparation for the war, a lot of different federal security agencies, very similar to DNS, our fictional security agency in V-Wars, made lists that were custodial detention lists, and they were called ABC lists of people who were potentially dangerous. If you were on list A, then you were known dangerous aliens. Folks on list B were labeled potentially dangerous, and folks on list C were people they thought warranted surveillance because they believed they had pro-Axis sympathies or they had participated in propaganda activities that might make them lean towards supporting the Axis instead of the Allies. So with these lists, most of them were not actually factually based. They weren't thoroughly vetted. They were based on who these people came into contact with in their daily lives. It was guilt by association rather than just going out and doing individual investigations. So think of it as like contact tracing, but instead of it being for COVID, then anyone you have been in contact with who may have been in contact with someone else who was potentially or known to be an Axis sympathizer could get you interred in a camp, and at the very least, surveilled. So with these lists, most of the names came from membership or subscription lists of organizations and publications that the dominant party considered to be subversive. And it's not possible to give precise numbers for the total number of folks who were interned or the numbers of each nationality, according to different encyclopedia entries. But several civilian agencies like INS and the FBI and military authorities arrested these individuals and took them to the internment camps. The surviving records that we do have are not complete. And honestly, I'm not surprised by that. It's not like General May is likely in V-Wars to keep a lot of these records either. And indeed, we see this again here. I can go ahead and lock up my phone and my keys and my wallet and anything else that I have that's valuable that I don't want to get wet at a water park and be able to easily get that back later. It'll even print you a ticket at some places that will show you exactly the number of your locker. And that is especially if you are more at an amusement park rather than a water park. But we have had all these children separated from their parents, and we don't know how to reassociate them because they didn't even give them a receipt. If you go to prison, they will collect your items, and you can collect them from the guards when you are released. But we cannot reassociate these children. That does not, to me, seem to be an accident altogether. And judging by history and how this played out in World War II, we see that this is pretty standard operating procedure for these types of internment camps. Until spring in 1943, the civilian internees were largely under military custody. Most were then transferred to INS, Immigration and Naturalization Service is what that stands for if you are not in the know. And they had also held some civilians since early in the war. INS released some reports throughout the years of the amount of people they were holding, but they were never really specifically clear as to which categories of people they were counting. So with this seemingly intentional type of vagueness, you could not entirely account for individuals at all, and it allowed for folks to easily go missing. And also now, even 60, 80 years later, we are not able to account for exactly how many individuals were interned. So in late 1944, the head of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, reported that 14,807 enemy aliens, as they termed them, had been taken into custody by the FBI, and about 2/5 of them had been ordered to be interned by the Attorney General and military authorities. That number seems very precise, but it may be misleadingly so, because early on in World War II, a lot of folks were arrested by local authorities and then held under military authority in places like Camp Forest, Tennessee, and they are most likely not included in his totals. There were 40,000 Japanese nationals who were incarcerated by the War Relocation Authority, alongside 80,000 American citizens of Japanese ancestry who were also considered alien enemies who were not on the government's lists. So in total, the best estimate they have been able to obtain for the amount of interned persons is around 11,000 individuals, and they've broken it down as about 8,000 individuals of Japanese nationality or ancestry, 2,300 of German, and a few hundred of Italian ancestry/nationality. A lot more were arrested and held in custody for days and weeks without being officially processed. And of the total, 2,254 Japanese individuals, most of them being from Peru, and 4,058 Germans and 288 Italians were brought from 15 separate Latin American countries and interned in INS camps. That is very extensive, and it shows how far the government is sometimes willing to go to intern people, to lock people up. They literally brought them in from other countries, but somehow we are unable to reassociate these children with their parents, many of whom were with them when they were separated from them and placed in cages. And that's exactly what General May is advocating for in V-Wars. He wants to put these women and children and men who are Bloods, who may become Bloods, who've had any contact with Bloods, into these internment camps to be held without any type of safety precautions from each other or any type of real paperwork or records keeping or truly processing. He's just gathering them all together and putting them into cages. That is what General May wants, and that is historically a very American solution to potential threats. We're going to go on another break, and when we come back, we're going to pick up with where the Bloods are in Michael Fane's leadership. Stay tuned.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Before the break, we were discussing internment camps of V-Wars, World War II America, and modern-day America. Now we're going to talk about where Michael Fane is right now with the Bloods. Michael has found himself in a position in which leadership has been thrust upon him. He is wearing this new mantle and doing his best to create rules that everyone can live by, to be fair to his new people and to the humans from which they have evolved. As fair as vampires can generally be. So Michael organizes the Blood's new oath as well, and that's in order to be a Blood and to be in Michael's group. You have to take pride in being a Blood, give help, and don't kill kids. So not hurting kids is one of Michael's top rules, and we're not entirely sure, honestly, why becoming 18 is suddenly making people able to be aged into becoming vampire juice boxes, but it's, kind of, I think, supposed to just intimate to us that Michael is a good guy and he has some sense of ethics. He doesn't want children terrorized, or perhaps he just wants to make sure that the blood supply doesn't run out by making sure that individuals are able to age to a point where they have about 5 liters of blood in their bodies and that they are still growing up. It may be a matter of treating them like livestock, but it seems to be that Michael has a soft spot for kids. At least I think that that's what we are meant to really get from it. I'm not sure. Let me know what your thoughts are on that in the comments on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. But I like that Michael is saying, hey, this is something that's natural to our bodies, and this is something we should take pride in. Now, draining people dry of their blood is not necessarily something to take pride in, but Michael is viewing it as something that makes them unique, and he considers them to be apex predators. He even goes so far as to tell Luther in the previous episode that Michael believed that they were a whole new species. Now, I already went into my thoughts about that and how I'm not entirely sure that they would not be able to breed with humans because of the gene that has now been expressed. I don't think that that should cause that problem, but I am not a geneticist. So if any of you are geneticists, please do hit me up so we can pick this thing apart together. I'm very interested in hearing what you think about that, because his DNA has not changed, just the epigenetic expression of it, the phenotype. So I would think that they would be able to still breed with humans. At least that is my initial hypothesis, pending further investigation. But we do see that Michael seems to have more ethics than some of the other Bloods, like Monster, who is killing a lot of his biker friends. Just indiscriminately killing, really. And also Danny. So he has those 3 rules. Take pride, give help, and don't kill kids. By giving help, I'm assuming he means that for other Bloods. We don't really think he has any qualms with killing humans, as Michael has, so far, killed a lot of humans. He did spare the lady who was blind at the bus station, and so it seems that, I don't know if it doesn't seem very sporting for him, or he has an issue with not harming vulnerable individuals, but Michael didn't really specify any other groups that may be particularly vulnerable. He didn't say no pregnant women. He did not say the elderly or anything like that. Just specifically kids. So your guess is as good as mine as to what this strange double standard might really be for. We also see that the DNS has identified that Danica is a Verdilak, and they take Luther with them to go and track her down. Swan initially refuses to carry a gun, but then a DNS agent named Big Dog gives him one anyway. And, it might be better for him to be armed ahead of time if Luther knows how to fire a firearm. That's kind of important. You need individuals that have firearms training, or they may be even more of a danger with a firearm in trying to protect themselves than they would be in just perhaps fighting with hand-to-hand combat. Who knows? But the DNS and Luther go together to Danica's place, and it very much looks like a drug den. So there are folks in there who are strung out and addicted to her venom, and she's just been continuing to feed upon them. We also see that they're searching through this facility, and Luther is almost bitten because they allowed a scientist to go in there with them and sweep the room. That is a little bit bewildering to me, but I digress. I guess you can just hand anyone a gun and assume that they know how to use it and are now a deputized DNS agent, as though this man isn't still a climate scientist and epidemiologist. So he is almost bitten, but he's alright in the end. And they catch the vampires who are still in that den, or nest, depending on if we're following supernatural rules or following rules of other types of vampire shows. I'm not entirely sure what to call a group of Bloods in this one, or the place that they live. Perhaps we'll just follow Diablo 2 rules, and it can be the Bloodmore. I don't know. The Den of Evil in the Bloodmore. We'll go with one of those. But afterwards, we see that Eller and Luther put the vampires onto a bus. So they are now busing them to one of these internment camps. But Danica is able to break free from the zip ties they use on her, and then she attacks them and leaves the bus. So, I'm not sure why they thought that putting zip ties on a vampire was going to work, given that Michael had previously broken through handcuffs and other restraints while in custody and in the hospital. So that's a little bit fuzzy for me, but this imaginary DNS works in mysterious ways. So Danica is wearing zip ties and is able to break free and flee from the bus area. We also see that the vampire hunter, the self-proclaimed vampire hunter / gang member Bobby, has shown up in time to shoot her. So it almost feels like the cavalry has arrived, but unfortunately, this is pretty much just as much bad news bears as Danica and the vamps were. Except the vamps might have just gone ahead and fed on Luther and kept him alive for a while, whereas Bobby is likely to just kill anyone. He is Frank from It's Always Sunny. just hopping out there and going, anyway, I started blasting. And that's really the approach that Bobby is taking. He is hopped up and unhinged, much like Frank is a lot in It's Always Sunny, but even more homicidal than that. So Bobby shows up and shoots her, but he just kind of wings her. Just like Frank, he is not very good at it, and so he misses. So when he wings her, he sends Jimmy out into the woods to go and track her. And they end up in a standoff and just go their separate ways. Jimmy pretty much lets her go, is what it comes down to. So then Luther decides he's going to shoot all of Danica's victims, who she's been keeping addicted to her venom. He thinks that they are all going to become vampires. He doesn't necessarily understand how this works because he's going off of presuppositions that draw upon vampire lore from folk tales and fantasy and horror movies. The types of vampire stuff we normally see. But we know that from Luther's standpoint, this is something that they would have to actually have transmitted to them, and that not everyone who's exposed to this vampire virus is going to necessarily get it. Excuse me, prions. But not everyone who is exposed to the prions will get it. We do know that it can be exchanged via body fluid and or respiratory droplets, as Jess got it from Luther while they were being intimate, but we don't know exactly how that happened. We know that Danica also got it from Michael while they were out dating and stuff, and that Monster got it from Michael as well. But for Monster to have come in contact with those from Michael, he either would have had to have been face to face with Michael, or perhaps Michael had breathed on his hands or something, scratched his face, I'm not sure, and then touched something on the motorcycle that Monster touched, and then touched his own face. I think with COVID-19, we've all recently learned that we all touch our faces a lot more frequently than we perhaps previously thought. So that might be how that happened too. But we know that it's from this virus, and that it's not necessarily transmitted from the bite. So we need to wait it out and see, because just because they've been exposed via Danica's bite doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to turn. But Bobby kills every single one of them in front of Luther. And Luther is absolutely distraught. And I'm just going to say it, Ian Somerhalder always does a fantastic job of coming across as completely stricken. He just carries it in his entire body, and I love that about him when he played Damon in Vampire Diaries, and I love that about him as Luther Swan in V-Wars. So this is one of my favorite scenes, not because Bobby's going around capping people, but because Luther's reaction feels very genuine, and he just feels completely shocked and gutted by it, because he's been put in this situation with these DNS agents. But remember, he's still a scientist. That's what this whole episode is really showing us, is that Luther is working with the system, but it's still because they're blackmailing him, and because he thinks that this is his best way to help out his friend and these other people whom he considers to simply be sick, and that if he leaves, he is going to leave them at the mercy of these individuals like Bobby who want to kill them all, whether that be by keeping them in internment camps or just shooting them on sight. This episode really shows us that Luther has at this point learned from his previous mistakes about who to trust with these authority figures in this fictional world, and that he knows he can't trust Nikos since Claire told him that, and he's not able to trust General May because General May believes the antithesis of what Luther is believing and working to achieve, and he is horrified at seeing how history may start replaying itself out. He is first and foremost a scientist and a humanitarian and a family man. Of course, none of that matters to DNS, and none of that matters to Bobby, who is very much in just this us versus them mentality. And because Luther has been a witness to this slaying, he tells one of the guys in the gang, Walker, to go ahead and kill Luther for witnessing the murders. But Luther is able to kind of break out of his stupor enough to shoot this person first, but he is also still very much in shock and bewildered that he's even able to pull it off, which I thought was a very apt response to choose for this character. I really liked that he seemed shocked by it himself, and even perhaps a little upset by those actions. Jimmy then comes back from the woods in his encounter with Danica, but then he just leaves. And we know that by this point, he's pretty much a guy working undercover for the FBI. And that's why he has an ankle holster with a firearm that looked to Bobby to be a cop firearm. We are going to go on another break, and when we come back, we are going to wrap up what we found out about the prion disease and its epigenetic factors, as well as Kaylee and what the other vamps have been doing. Stay tuned.
Watching TV has changed over time. Streaming has become the new norm. That's why Golden State Media Concepts television podcast dives headfirst to the world of cord cutting. Want to be on the loop of what's hot in Netflix? Or if it's not a preference, what about original shows in Hulu? We've got you covered. Join us as we fill in the blanks and talk about movies to stream and what show you should be binging. This is the Golden State Media Concepts television podcast.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were breaking down what was happening with DNS finding Danica's vampire den and putting the vamps in a bus to ship them likely to this new internment camp that is advocated for by General May, only for Danica to break free from her zip ties, attack folks in the bus, and then flee. But then Vampire Hunter Bobby shows up and shoots her and sicks Jimmy on her out in the woods when he just wings her. Then we see Luther be able to shoot one of Bobby's pals right before he is killed for being a witness. And we find out that Jimmy is pretty much an FBI guy. At least he's not DNS, right? I'm not sure. We're going to find out. Jimmy seems kind of alright. He didn't want to kill that other guy that Bobby told him to kill, but we'll see how it plays out. Michael, at the same time, is over with the Bloods trying to figure out the organizational structure. So if you've ever been a part of a startup, then you may be familiar with some of these woes that Michael is currently experiencing, and how he is simultaneously elated and just exhausted in trying to figure out how to lead these people, what their credo should be, who his second in command should be, and so on, and how to punish people when they step out of bounds. So Michael asks Ava, the 19-year-old female vampire who he first encountered when she was carrying that red gas can down the road, Red Riding Hood style, and was harassed by those guys. He has asked her to become his second in command. And she looks at him sideways like, I'm only 19. And he tells her that he believes in her and that the 3 rules are to give help, have pride in being a blood, and to not feed on kids. And she seems to very easily agree to that. And we see that it's very easy for some of these vampires to agree to a code of ethics. Michael is the one who comes up with these, but very many of them don't protest them. And they have meetings with big groups of vamps all day, every day, as they are bringing new members into the fold. So it's like new vampire orientation, essentially. And he wants her to help him out because it's becoming a little bit overwhelming for him. And he trusts her. He barely knows her better than any of the others, but he did know her before he knew the others, so he feels that he can trust her, especially since she gathered some more bloods and had his back when DNS broke their word about Luther being able to meet with him one-on-one, and they sent a sniper to him instead. So, Michael has asked Ava, and she's agreed. But meanwhile, in another part of the city, because I believe we are all still in Seneca right now, there is another vampire who is hanging out with Danica's sister, Mila. And Mila's friend proposes killing a homeless man. And this is where we start to see that Mila has some very strong opinions about vampires, even if she is one. Mila kills the fellow vampire instead, and we see that she is not just avoiding Danny, but rather that she's carrying a lot of animosity towards vampires in general, and her sister specifically. Mila is a very kind soul. She was the one who was taking care of their mother before, and she's always been the responsible one. Mila already seems to have had a lot of self-control beforehand and was more selfless, whereas Danny is more selfish and she is not really used to delayed gratification. So Mila would perhaps be a really great Green Lantern. That's what I'm saying. Danny, not so much. So Mila is out there, and we're not entirely sure what she's doing, but it seems that she knows she has to drink blood or she'll die. So she's not quite ready to die. She may be wanting absolute vengeance, or to just avenge others and to protect humans who would otherwise be at the mercy of bloods, as she was when her sister attacked her. She is drinking from blood bags from a local blood bank, but she is not eating these individuals or killing them herself. Since Danny is a Verdilak, I would think that Mila would also be a Verdilak, especially since Tolstoy's original Verdilak was from a family. It had a very strong family genetic component, and that novella was referred to as the family of the Verdilak when translated into English. So Mila very likely could feed upon these people, and they would just become addicted to her venom, but it wouldn't kill them, and she could probably just do a catch and release method, kind of like fishing. But in this case, Mila is not even okay with that ethically. So Danny doesn't draw the line anywhere. Michael draws it at killing kids, and Ava readily agrees to that one. But Mila is not okay with drinking blood from anyone at all. For her, it seems to be an issue of morality and consent and ethics based on her own personal experience. Now, if someone were to offer themselves to be fed upon by her to heal herself, perhaps that might change. And as time goes on, perhaps we'll see something happen like that between her and Luther or one of the other characters, since it won't technically kill him if she is a Verdilak, which I am like 85 to 90% sure that she is. That is what would make the most sense anyway. Michael seems to be closer to the Ripper type that you see in the originals and legacies and Vampire Diaries. Like, he has almost no control when he feeds and just goes through several different bodies, not even draining all of them completely before going on to the next one. Mila is not willing to take that chance, though, and I'm excited to see where she goes with this. She gives me some Michonne vibes from The Walking Dead at certain points. She has a very strong conviction, and she is willing to harm those who would hurt the vulnerable, no matter who that would be, whether that be a homeless person or a child or someone else that she knows. If you are not giving your consent, Mila's not here for it. And even then, she might not. We haven't come across that possibility yet. We also see that Teresa, played by Samantha Cole, has told Luther about the NH47 gene. So she had a hunch that this was also epigenetic and that there may be a common trait amongst folks who become vampires and a different polymorphism amongst those who don't. So a polymorphism, as we've discussed previously, is just a couple of variants of a particular DNA sequence. So in this case, it is the DNA sequence at the NH47 gene. So a lot of times, the type of polymorphism that you have is just variation at a single base pair. So instead of having a TA, you have a CG. So that base pair is now a different base pair. And that can change the gene expression. You may see that as a single nucleotide polymorphism, a SNP. That's the type that I just explained. But you can also have STRPs, so short tandem repeat polymorphisms, in which the same sequence is repeated multiple times. So, for example, TAG, TAG, TAG. Those could just be repeated right then. So these units could be repeated at different lengths. One person might have 3 copies of that repeat unit of those 3 different base pair sequences, and then another individual may have 5 of them, or 7 of them. And that's important for how it changes your genotype and your phenotype. So if there is a lot of human genetic variation at this NH47 gene, that would account for why some folks like Luther get a bit sick but don't end up being altered into a blood by the prions at all, while others like Jess seem to not really even get sick and then just are vampires. And then we have people like Danica who do get sick but also present as Verdilaks instead, whereas the others like Michael don't have any venom in them. So there may be at least 3 different types of polymorphisms at the NH47 gene, and I'm not sure if they are STRPs or SNPs, but it could go either way. I just wanted to dive into that a little bit more with y'all in case you were curious. Now that Teresa has found this genetic trait, Luther is really panicking and trying to get her to stop talking immediately. And then he asks her if she wants a glass of water and turns on the sink. to try to drown out the sounds of him talking in case there is a bug in there, which there most definitely is. And he whispers to her that she should not tell the government at all. He tells her straight up, do not tell them, and immediately encrypt your findings, because the government is going to start targeting anyone with those genes if you hand that over. Based on what General May already has said, and him already having advocated for this internment camp, and also the history of the U.S. with these ABC lists we discussed earlier, Luther knows very well that if they have the ability to target people who have anything in common, then they will. And so Teresa cannot let it be known that she found out anything about that gene. And he also knows that they are likely, as the DNS, not above the unlawful search and seizure of lining people up and blood testing them to see if they are a genetic threat. Even a potential one, as in the case of genetic similarities and family histories, you would be able to find one person who has this and then target their entire family as likely or potential threats and put them on the B or the C list as folks who are likely to have turned, or to conduct contact tracing and find folks who are secondarily or even tertiarily or more exposed to the virus via these individuals, or likely to become bloods via contact with these individuals, even if they do not already have their blood or DNA on file. They would all likely be rounded up into this internment camp. And Luther is not about to hand over any further information that could result in further harm to people who he considers to merely be sick. He's spoken with Michael, and Michael has pulled another blood away from ripping out Luther's throat. He knows that his brother is still there. He's just a little different right now. And Luther's still chalking all of this up to being ill, even as Michael is telling him, this is who I am in my DNA. This is my DNA expression, and I am not sick. This is natural to who I am as a person, because it was able to be so easily turned on in my epigenetics. But he knows that Michael isn't going to harm him specifically. He was initially worried about it, that Michael would harm Jess and or Des, but now Luther is not concerned about that. He knows that Michael is still Michael. He is just going through a period of growth and change in his life, even if Luther considers that to largely be a product of an illness rather than, as Michael believes it to be, who he may naturally be. We also see that Kaylee and Jurgen are able to broadcast Michael's announcement that there will be a war on humans, since humans are advocating, especially those like General May, for the hunting down and the internment or extinction of vampires. So he is not okay with this, and he's going to fight back by any means necessary. Fane also urges the Bloods across the U.S. to fight together with them in this war. So this isn't just an announcement of war, it's also a call to action simultaneously. And we see that Kaylee and Jurgen are not going to be strong-armed by DNS. They were threatened this last time, but now they're trying to be more careful, and they are wanting to get the truth out there to everyone, no matter what that truth may be. At the end of this episode, we get to see Luther go back home and check on Des. Des is now sick, and we aren't sure if it is going to make him turn, or if it is something else that's causing the problem. Much like right now, where you can't initially tell if it's COVID-19 or other types of symptoms until you get tested or until it takes a really bad turn for the worse. So there are a lot of parallels in this show to elements of American history and current events. This episode really helps cement my love for this show. It is sociocultural, it's sociopolitical, it's showing the variability in humans, both culturally in the choices that they're making, like the differences between Michael and Mila and Danny and Luther, and also genetically, like the differences between Michael and Danny and Luther. I'm very interested to see how all of these intersect with each other, and if we made semi-transparent Venn diagrams for this, I think we would see some very interesting overlap with especially Danny and Michael and Mila and Luther. Mila is a very interesting character for me, and I'm also stoked to see how Des ends up in this situation. Remember that Jess was his stepmom, so we don't know exactly if Des got that gene that will make him immune to it, like Luther, or if his genes are encoded to go ahead and make him a vampire if he's exposed to it. And if so, a Verdilak or the Ripper type, which is really just the standard type, seemingly. And this one, I'm just referring to it as a Ripper because I don't know what else to call it. But that seems to be the closest approximation I could find. But we don't know exactly what's going to happen to Des. Is he going to be something else entirely? Now that this is spreading exponentially, it has the potential to turn into many different things, to take many different routes. Are there only 3 polymorphisms for this gene? Or are there 5? Are there dozens? Hundreds? Who's to say? Hopefully we will see the rest of that unfold as the story progresses. But for tonight, that is all I have for you. Thank you for listening to the GSMC Sci-Fi Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'd like to ask that you please subscribe to the show, and writing a nice review always really helps us. Also, if you could please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, I'd appreciate it. Thank you kindly, and have a good night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.